All right. You guys know how this works. If you're part of the Operation Domination show, we're going to present our two cases. And in this case, Bob's going to be the one judging the argument between Chris and I over James Conner. And we're going to try to tie in a little Trey Benson analysis in that as well. I am the lowest on the board here, admittedly, on James Conner. I have him ranked at 27th. Chris has him at 15th. So we're operating on two very different tiers here at an RB3 and a mid-level RB2. So Chris, why are you confident in James Conner again this season?
Well, I liked what I saw last year, Dan. Number one, he averaged 5 years per carry, which is pretty impressive for a guy that we're trying to knock him for being older or going to lose his job possibly this year. Usually guys that average 5 yards per carry go over 1,000 yards is kind of hard to replace. And is at the floor. I think James Conner showed you at the end of the season, the 5-game stretch there where he had 22.5, 16.4, 19.7, 25.8, and 28.4 for your life playoff run. That's a nice little playoff run, a guy that you had for James Conner, an offense that we saw Arizona kind of find itself. Even with Kyler Murray, throwing the ball more often and doing different things that we kind of talked about earlier in the show, James Conner was still very effective. And what we saw him be effective with is running the ball down very effectively, but he also caught the ball in the backfield, which James Conner can do. So I look at a guy as one of those last of the opportunities be the bell cow backs. I just want to clarify something too. Once we get outside the top 5, basically, running back situation, you're going to have a lot of guys who are going to be 65, 35, 60, 40. That's going to be the norm moving forward. So I'm looking for the guys who are going to have the upside with that 60%, 65% touches of things. And this is where I see a guy that I think at least he's going to have those touches barring a major injury. Trey Benson is a good player. I think he'll be factored in. But we saw last year Michael Carter got factored in towards the end of the season. We saw DeMarco get factored in 2 weeks previous to that. So they were involved in the passing attack. They're involved in the rushing attack. To say that they got about 10, 12 touches about combined between the two running backs was about what you saw. So there is room for James Conner to have some things taken away from him as well and still eat. I'm not aiming him to be quite as high as he was last year, like I said, but I feel like a guy that I have a pretty consistent feel for as long as he's healthy. And that's a key thing for James Conner, so I can't argue that strongly. But if James Conner is healthy and look at around the other names are getting drafted around the same time he is, a lot of guys have injury questions too. I'm going to lean with the guy that I liked what I saw most on tape last year and a guy who I see upside in his offense.
Yeah, I mean, look, Chris, there's a few things that I do agree with you, despite having James Conner ranked much lower. He did look impressive towards the end of last year. I think you missed the drop the mic moment. He was RB1 from week 13 on. He was very impressive towards the late end of last season. And of course, his efficiency was the best it ever has been in his career. I mean, he had 5 yards a carry, and that's way over what he's usually at, which is usually 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, somewhere in that range in his first season going over 1,000 yards. So I don't disagree with anything there. My ranking of 27th for James Conner is not so much a reflection of what I think you're going to get on a week-to-week basis when he is healthy and playing, or throughout, let's say, the month of September, maybe even October. You're going to get probably more closer to where you have him ranked at RB15 in production during those weeks. And last year, he finished the RB9 on a points per game basis. But it was all due to that late surge from week 13 on in that 5-game little stretch. In the first part of the season, the first 12 weeks of the season, he missed 4 games, which I'm going to touch a little bit more about that in a second. But even the other 8 games during those first 12 weeks, he was only the RB36 on a points per game basis. So it was a very uneven season for James Conner. Yes, he did much better once Kyler Murray started to get back into the mix a little bit more, and perhaps he was a little bit healthier. I'm not going to knock him too much for that, but he is turning age 29. This is a running back who's never played an entire season. And I think more so this is what would deter me and why I have him ranked at 27th and more concerned about over the back half of the year. Because he's a player who has missed now 4 games in back-to-back seasons, it's not a matter of if, but when he's going to miss time. Trey Benson is a talent profile that hasn't been around James Conner for quite some time. He represents more of a threat than we have seen. I didn't realize Chris has jumped off the screen here. Hopefully we'll get him back in just a second before the showdown's over. But he is somebody who represents more touches to be taken away from James Conner than what we've seen over recent seasons, especially while he's been in Arizona. So here's my thing with Conner. While he would get injured it was never a question as to whether or not he will get his job back when he's ready to come back. I think that can be more of a question now. James Conner's on the last year of his contract. Normally speaking, that would actually be a positive for me. But because I don't think the Cardinals are in a position to be winning now, they may look at it and say, hey, if Trey Benson comes in while James Conner's out and he's playing a hell of a game, they may look to move this offense forward with their future stars in Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison and Trey Benson. And he kind of gets phased out as a result because of whatever time he missed, and Benson looks impressive. I think it's more of a threat than it has been in years past. So that's why I have Connor more ranked at 27th, reflecting what I think might happen over the second half of the season potentially. I thought I was going to have Trey Benson ranked the highest of the group. Actually, Adam does, but I do have him inside the top 40. So with all that, Bob, you go ahead and judge the debate here.
I'm glad Chris made it back for this epic win. It was a destruction of Dan. It was horrifying to see. I feel bad. I was shedding tears as I saw how badly Dan was getting beaten. No, like obviously the range of possible outcomes we have covered quite well. You got a bad day to get an injury agnostic judge. But you know, and we'll talk about Trey Benson. But anytime you have a guy, when we're talking about the speed, when there's a 3 after the 4, I get really excited. And so I'm excited about Trey Benson at 216 pounds. I think this year his best hope is as a receiving back, third down back, barring something happening to Connor, which, you laid it out. It does happen. I'm hoping it doesn't happen. I like him as a running back too. I think, coming off the career year, he said it the other day. We mentioned the floor. He said that is the floor. We're an offense that Drew Petzing brought with him that makes the difference for me.
Yeah,